Hi everyone, welcome back to the round five of the four-season tournament here in Bologna. It is me, Dave Jones, and we're here to take you with Mason Clark through until the end of the day. So far, we've had some amazing action here with all variety of decks being played. And Mason, all I can say, I think Modern is in a beautiful place.
Yeah, Modern's in a really great spot right now. There's a lot of different decks you can play and a lot of different strategies as well. With in each of these strategies having a different deck, so it's pretty cool. We got to see a really awesome new take on Affinity. Just a couple new cards from TMNT, but in Modern, it's hard for a card to really break in, right? So even getting just two of those into a deck right away is pretty exciting for the future of the format.
Yeah, they've only had one day, so to be fair to
Yeah.
any of them, they had to think about and submit a deck list last evening. We have
Mhm.
seen a couple. We've seen a good old skateboard here and there drop
Mhm.
out, but the modern meta game has been diverse every single round, and has been something that's been an absolute joy to watch. We've getting through to round five now, and obviously this is a 9 round tournament. They've actually had 274 players, which actually thinking about where we are in the current state in Europe, we obviously are about to go into an RC weekend, and people are still traveling for this. But we're going to go into round five where we've got an affinity deck back on stream, and this one Mason seems to just be pretty much we'll call it TMNT right now because we can still see a lava spear boots.
Yeah, still Lava Spur Boots and no Krang, the mastermind, that new, sometimes draw four, sometimes draw one, sort of hybrid card there. So looks like, and like you said, the set's only been out for a day, so maybe we even wanted to get a skateboard or a Krang, but we maybe couldn't get our hands on it in time for the event. But this deck is really powerful. It's really fun. I'm really glad to see, that Arcbound Ravager is back in Modern. This is one of my favorite Modern
Oh
decks right
yes.
now. I think it's really powerful. So I'm really excited to see it once again in the future match area, selfishly.
Yeah, and the closer Gix as well. Another sort of card which
Mhm.
has found its way back around from being in bulk bins left, right, and center to now actually being such a staple of this deck, and a strong thing which pulls it through in the long game, the late game, to sort of grind things out. Like we just saw it sort of take its
Mhm.
time against Yawgmoth and just basically shut it down and be able to win out the game there. But I see little new touches. Pinnacle Emissary also there, sort of like bringing up for the new school. They are going to be going up against, is it Murktide? This is again another good old staple from the modern setup. Corey Steelcutter's here. Murktide jumps in and out of the meta, sometimes in
Mhm.
sideboards, sometimes in main. What are you thinking about where it's positioned now?
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting spot. Modern hasn't had much real competitive pressure on it since their last sort of big Modern event we had with the Pro Tour about 6 months ago, which is hard to believe. Time flies here, so
Yeah.
it's interesting to see. And I think decks like Murktide often do better when people are doing stuff that either oscillates between fair but not like incredibly grindy and combo-y, right? So your spell pierces, your counter spells, they line up, a bit better typically here. But this one, like you're mentioning, has Corey Steelcutter and is a bit more, trying to answer threats after they resolve. We have a single subtlety, a single force negation, a single spell pierce. Not the classic Murktide you might have seen, even 6 months to a year ago that was rocking, 3 or 4 counter spells in the main deck. The El Clasico, the 2 mana one here. But this one, very proactive, taking the board, and it's interesting. I think typically players have been much more interested in Demir Murktide instead of Is It, but this makes a bit of sense to me that, maybe you want Corey Steelcutter. You want to have more cards that can answer the energy menace. And so I'm excited to see how this one lines up against the Affinity deck, because I know this matchup can be a little tricky for traditional Murktide decks. So I'm curious if this new spin on it can be the difference maker.
Yeah, they're absolutely right. And we've going straight to the action. We've got the good old turn one Ragavan straight out there. And the monkey is back doing work, doing a menace. Had a little bit of a period where it was on the down tick, but right now swinging in for one and swinging in for a turn two hit here is going to really start to mess with Affinity. Ooh, a close the Gix taken away there. This what they like to see, not only chipping away at the life total, but actually taking away some of the really key pieces.
Yeah, and hitting a Claw of Gigs here, it's free. It doesn't cost you anything, and there aren't a ton of hits that the Murktide player is going to really want to get off the Affinities deck that they would want to play this early in the game anyway. So, potentially making it so a Kappa Canyon is a little harder to come down is something that's totally fine. And when your opponent starts off with turn one Bauble Pass, you can expect something like a Pinnacle Emissary pop off or even into a Kappa Cannoneer on that turn number two. So I think this zero probably, not your favorite thing in the world, but could be surprisingly very impactful as the game progresses.
Yeah, and to go to when Ragavan get a hit in and get Corey Steelcutter down, I think you don't want anything. Oh, and also, and also following up with another creature is just a fantastic start if you're sitting on the Izzet side of the table.
Great adaptation here from Franesco. Sort of immediately being like, okay, I'm going to get my core heal starter down, like do kind of play I want to, and also I want to sequence it like this to get max information with my DRC surveil. So very nice, small technical things like this matter a bunch in Magic. Love to see clean play like that.
Yeah, that was the difference of two pieces of cardboard there, right? And like
Mhm.
those two pieces of cardboard could really be the reason that the affinity player might not be able to catch up in the coming turns. Hoping they've hit a land. Doesn't not they may doesn't look like it potentially, but they are able to develop the Pinnacle Emissary. And here comes the zero drops. Here comes the team. So
Mhm.
they may be able to follow up here with a little bit of fight alongside this board that's been developing.
Yeah, this is an interesting moment for Lorenzo. I wonder what has changed because it looked like Lorenzo had sort of planned the turn and then started to execute, which is beautiful. I love to see sort of think through what you're going to do, even if your opponent has counter spells, try to come up with like a slight plan and then start going. But clearly, there's something popped up in our mind that we wanted to start thinking about there. So I wonder if maybe there's a different line that approached us, or maybe some card we're potentially afraid of. But here we go, making a bunch of drones onto the battlefield. And I think you're right. I don't think we have a land drop, but we have enough to get out of Kappa Cannoneer if we hit one Warmox Opal in the next turn.
Yeah, I think a sort of an appreciation for if I take too much damage across 3 turns, I won't get a big turn myself here. And just these couple of drones giving a little bit of insurance and to get that Capacanio quicker. I consider a card which again has been in and out of the decks, but coming down and is going to start to pump this team.
It's
Um,
pretty interesting to see Consider over Preordain,
mm.
and Thought Scour as well, sort of in this deck. I mean, Consider I think has usurped Thought Scour for the most part, but if you are going to main phase these sort of cards in order to trigger your Core Steel Cutter more, I would expect Thought Scour to at least be a consideration, and maybe other builds and other times it has been.
Yeah, I think potentially on the fact that they've leaned towards counter spells in this deck, it gives them that option to sort of play both rather than have to kind of give away information of if
Well,
I'm playing on sorcery speed, I'm going to be doing preordained if I'm but
Well, that's
having
the
that.
weird thing about Francesco, right? Is he has almost no counter spells in his main deck at least. So maybe
Yeah,
his
true.
sideboard is chock full of them. So, but yeah, I mean, this Corey Steelcutter is really showing off, like what the difference is of having the difference between a bunch of counter spells and not. Is the game one's already over.
I know, and an interesting monk token. We'll give them that. I've seen some relatively fantastic tokens when you go around the European scene. There's great
Hmm.
artists that we see in our Spotlight series and our RCs, but yeah, good ranking there. And Koi Steel has been showing up at the top tables today, so I'm sure we'll see more. What are you thinking about sideboard and Von Lorenzo then?
Yeah, so I mean, typically, as the Affinity deck, you want to still make sure you're presenting your core game plan and also trying to protect yourself from whatever you think the opponent's sideboard options are going to be against you. Because let's face it, we're all bringing some amount of hate towards artifacts, whether it's hard targeted towards this deck or not. You typically have something here. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Force Negation potentially be a card. Same for Mystical Dispute, just fight over other potential answers your opponent can have while also hitting a card like Murktide can be very, very impressive. Galvanic Blast might also be something that you want to bring in to stop things like early Ragavans or early DRC. So I imagine we're going to take a lighter touch, but you have some cards that you can trim on here in your main deck. Your Tormont's Crypts are pretty good at stopping the Murktides, but you do need to kind of use that proactively in the thing with DRC. So I imagine those will stay, but your Claw of Gixes, they're this kind of combo-y piece to your deck, and you can trim on those a bit post-board when the games get a bit more grindy. So I'm excited to see how we want to present ourselves for game number 2 here, as we do have a fair number of options in the way we want to do that.
Yeah, sort of almost like the engineer exploded loop is almost the perfect outcome for Lorenzo
Yeah.
as well, because it's just 1 and 2 drops that you're scared of, and as long as you can
Hmm.
make sure the Murktide never resolves, you're going to stay in control of this game in the long run. Similar kind of concept for the Murktide player. Again, just wanting to be able to remove the threats at the right time and the right place. So they certainly won't be as quick as game two, because there'll definitely be answers to the things which will be ahead of us.
Mhm.
They both 4-0 though, so obviously done well so far. And the meltdown is gonna be a slam dunk for them. Absolute
Yeah,
slam dunk.
the yeah, the MH3 sort of all-star reprint there against these kind of go wide affinity decks. And this was the kind of card I was talking about, right? This is what you need to be thinking about when you're sideboarding as the affinity deck. And a real skill with that deck is learning both the commonly played cards that can come at you, like Meltdown, but also maybe some more fringe ones that randomly overlap onto your strategy as well. Thinking about those and whether you play into them or around them is a big part of that deck. And obviously, if you're 4-0, you've done a pretty good job so far. So I'm excited to see that continues in game two. But like you mentioned, Meltdown and our good friend Pyroclasm here is another card you can bring in to sort of answer those go wide starts that we see there. I'm expecting stuff like that to happen. And then you might even see something like I've seen players bring in Strict Serenade before versus this deck, because Affinity only has a few really good threats when it comes to creatures. So serenading down something like Kappa Cannoneer, is actually pretty good. Where normally I think you think of that card more for something like Amulet Titan. Depends a lot on how you want your games to be structured here. But as we look at Francesco's deck once again, very low on counter magic, very proactive, and I kind of like this sort of approach, thinking about it more and more as I've been looking at the deck list here and trying to think about thoughts to tell y'all. It makes a lot of sense to me to be like, hey, listen, if I wanted to be the reactive version, Demir's probably a lot better at that. So let me try to lean into red strengths, play those 4 lightning bolts that can go face, play these Quarry Steel Cutters, and be a bit more aggressive and less controlling. And I think in the right matchups, this is probably vastly superior to the Dimir Murktide. So I'm really excited to see this deck play out in game number 2 here.
Sure, and a little lead into an avatar card. We've got a one of Price of Freedom there sitting in the
Mhm.
sideboard. So love to see it have an impact. Is Affinity looking to take charge here in game two, and maybe this is one of those sort of sideboarding times where Murktide will actually be sort of having a different plan for the play and the draw
Mhm.
specifically, because of that proactive line that they're looking to take. Mulligan decision still being thought about.
Yeah,
I
it
think
does look
that's
like Lorenzo is mulliganing. Although it could sometimes Affinity though, right? They hold all these cards and they just drop them on the table. So it's sometimes
yeah.
a
We
little tough to know.
We saw in round four a full six get deployed in the first turn, which was a sight to be seen. But just an engineer explosive, yeah, that is your defense lock and key here against Paris deck, and it's like I will hold that. I will hold like this one. You can't play any ones. You really want to be playing twos, but I see what they're gonna have to fight through if they want to take this one down. Just a land and I think
I think
it was
there's a
shocked in,
DRC
so
in hand.
DRC it looks
Yeah.
like, yeah.
Yeah, so we'll get a confirmation of that here in a second. And this is one of those awkward parts too about, a card like EE is sometimes you just have to play into it, right? You don't want your cards to die, but if this the hand you're dealt has a bunch of DRCs in it, which it looks to be the case here for our Murktide player, then you're gonna have to fight through the EE sooner than later. So don't let them use that to get out a Kappa or an Emery and let the game get out of control. As EE, with the Emery loop you talked about before, is pretty backbreaking, especially if you're leaning on Corey Steelcutter. Obviously you'd like to blow up the Steel Cutter, but even going on 0 in order to blow up all the tokens can be a really efficient way to kind of fight that fight.
Yeah, like you almost like wanna you want to put the DRC in a place that it's a 3/3 and it's hit twice, and then suddenly they
Mhm.
have to do something about it. And in fact, that you could by that point have a really explosive follow up. But like that sort of sometimes facing into the likely fear of I'm gonna lose this, but I need to make them waste that resource before it really matters. As we see the preordain come in, and again we're gonna be smoothing out our draws, filling up the graveyard. I think we might have already even hit delirium. Land artifact, sorcery.
Sorcerer.
Yeah.